Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Ellis Bonds. As Joe said, I use he, him, his pronouns, and I currently serve as the Associate Director for Intercultural Affairs at Elizabethtown College. And as Joe mentioned, I'm a proud brother of Lambda Sigma Epsilon Latino Fraternity Incorporated. So we're going to get into some of the presentation will entail and go kind of take it from there. So the overview of the presentation, we're going to go over some presentation norms, a little bit about myself, kind of dive into what I saw on Stockton's website and kind of how that plays into fraternity and sorority life, do some definitions, go over a little bit of history, go through some theory, then bringing it all together, and then next steps. So for presentation norms, I just ask that everyone be present and be engaged. There is going to be a portion for us to be talking and having a conversation. So I think everyone has their camera off right now. So people wouldn't mind turning their cameras on and just being engaged and present in this presentation. That would be greatly appreciated. I'm not someone that likes to just talk at people. That makes it very uncomfortable and very awkward. And you also have great things to say. So I want to hear what those things are. Please be attentive. Be real. So the thing about being real is that we're going to talk about history. And a lot of times in history, we want to glamorize it and romanticize it. And history is not always pretty. And so that's what I mean by be real. We're going to engage in some truth telling during this presentation. And I want us all to be comfortable with that. And then be ready. So be ready for the challenge, be ready to take the next step, be ready to take your chapter to the next level, be ready to hold your fellow members accountable, hold your new members accountable, all of that fun stuff. So these are just some norms that I have for any time I present, so that way I can make sure that I'm making the best out of the time that I have with you all. So a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Atlantic City, New Jersey, so about a quick 20-minute, 25-minute drive from Stockton. I graduated Stockton in the class of 2015 with a bachelor's of arts and liberal arts that concentrated in social sciences. So I did a lot of psychology, sociology, and social work courses. While I was at Stockton, as Joe mentioned, I joined my organization, Lambda Sigma Epsilon Latino Fraternity Incorporated, the spring of 2012. I am a number 7 for those who, we can get a little bit into that later on. While I was at Stockton, I did serve as chapter president. I served on the I served in the Greek Council as president. I was a part of Student Senate. I was a member of the Highest Praise Gospel Choir, where I sang in the choir for 4 years. I was president of the NAACP. I was vice president of Hope, helping other people excel. I worked in the campus center as an operations assistant. I worked as a resident assistant. I was an orientation leader. So I did a whole lot of stuff while I was there. And it kind of all emerged after I joined my Greek organization. So I'm very, very happy that I was able to do that as a first-year student, which then kind of impacted my future and things that I was able to accomplish while I was at Stockton. So we're just going to read this commitment. And it says, Stockton University is committed to building a diverse and respectful community that values individual and group social differences of race, creed, color, national origin, nationality, ancestry, sex, age, gender, including pregnancy, marital status, civil union status, domestic partnership status, familial status, religion, affectional or sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, atypical hereditary cellular or blood trait, genetic information, liability for service in the armed forces of the United States, or disability. That's a mouthful, but those are that's a lot of protected classes. So that's why they have to be stated. But the part of it is diversity is crucial to achieving the mission of a broad liberal arts education, structural, curricular, and co-curricular, and interactional campus diversity creates an inclusive and respectful environment for all students and employees. So my first question is, how does fraternity and sorority life honor this commitment? And Joe's not allowed to answer.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
I was just kind of going over the commitment that Stockton has on the website. I forgot what web page I saw it from specifically, but typically the last part, diversity is crucial to achieving the mission of a broad liberal arts education and things of that nature. And I wanted to know, how does the fraternity and sorority life at Stockton honor this commitment that Stockton has?
I would say one way is like, we do have a lot of minority organizations on campus. So that's one way.
Awesome. Anyone else?
I'm going to say the opposite and say that stuff kind of is starting to, but it really hasn't as much as probably they should.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else?
One of the ways they uphold this note is putting on programs that promote diversity and inclusion.
Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move forward. I definitely would say that one way is by establishing this DEI committee through Fraternity and Sorority Life through Greek Council. I think that's important. And it is something that is needed. You know, as Greek organizations, I was very active on campus as a member of my fraternity. And sometimes they don't really see all the work that goes into being a member of a chapter, to being a member of an organization, to be a member of a council and things like that. And it's a lot more than people know what it entails to like do it. So I definitely think that the creation of this committee and this position within each chapter is something that is also very good as well. Okay. So one thing about me is that I'm really big on like a strong foundation and kind of understanding, what exactly we're talking about when we speak, because we use them sometimes in higher education, and this is not just Stockton specific, it can be for any institution. I've worked at a few since Stockton, so I can tell you that it's very much so. When we talk about diversity and inclusion and equity and social justice and all that fun stuff, we talk about it, but it becomes buzzwords at some point. And so I think that sometimes we have to understand what these words mean to really grasp on how we can like implement them and make them action items for us to be able to make our campus or college a more inclusive place. So very simple, diversity. These are definitions taken from Webster Dictionary, by the way. I did not make these up myself. The condition of having or being composed of different elements, especially the inclusion of people of different races. So what I always tell people all the time is that the basis of diversity just means difference. That's literally all diversity means. I'm Black, you're white. I'm gay, you're straight. I'm tall, you're short. Like whatever, however you want to say it, it's just difference. Inclusion is the act of including or the state of being included. And then equity, justice according to natural law or right, freedom from bias or favoritism. So the way I kind of like to say it is, as members of social organizations, obviously not while COVID is happening. I hope no one's throwing like, parties and ragers and all that crazy stuff. But I like to explain it in terms of like going to a party. So being at a predominantly white institution as a Black person, this is how I would interpret it. Diversity is being asked to go to the party, right? So you're just being asked, like they thought about you. Hey, want to come to this party? Sure, why not? Inclusion is being asked to dance at the party. So you're not just there standing on a wall or sitting on a couch. You're actually asked to dance, like be included in the party and things like that. But when I think of equity as like now they're going to play some music that represents me at this party as well. So that's how I like to kind of define it and like bring it by layer for like just plain and simply for people to understand. Okay, so privilege, a right or immunity granted as a peculiar benefit, advantage, or favor. Oppression is unjust or cruel exercise of authority or power. And then marginalized is an unimportant or powerless position within a society or group. And the reason why I chose these words is because a lot of times we talk about privilege, and, you know, privilege for me, if anyone here runs track, I ran track when I was in high school, and about one semester at Stockton, I didn't stick with it as a college athlete. But privilege is like the wind when you're running. When you're running with the wind and the wind's helping you glide, it's like pushing you along further. And you've done nothing to get that. You've just literally started running, and the wind happened to be working in your direction that day. Versus running against the wind, which is like oppression. So you constantly have to push a little bit harder, work, try to run a little bit faster, and things like that to get to the finish line and get the same goal. So that's how I like to define privilege and oppression. And then obviously marginalized, a marginalized group is someone who is unimportant or in a powerless position within a society or group. So understand that because we have privilege and we have privileged identities, we have to have marginalized identities as well. So those are the identities that are that have the lack of access to resources. Those are the identities that kind of fall into systemic oppression. So whether it be the system of education, whether it be the system of housing, whether it be the criminal justice system, whether it be the workforce system, whatever the case may be, they're marginalized in various systems. And some of those identities are people who are people of color. So whether you're Black, Asian or Asian American, Hispanic, Latinx, or you can be a member of the LGBTQ plus community, that also puts you in a marginalized group. If you happen to be disabled, you're in a marginalized group because sometimes things are not accessible for you, whether that's visible disability or invisible disability. If you're a veteran, which is kind of strange because, you go out and you fight for the country and you do so much for our country, but yet you're still in a marginalized group in our country, which is extremely sad. So those are just some groups, and that's how it kind of works. Like privilege, we have those groups are people who you didn't do anything to get it, but that's the privilege you were born with. So I identify as male. I was born male. I identify with the sex I was assigned at birth, sorry. And that was no work on my own. That was just how I was born. But that's a privilege that I know that I hold in society. So just using that as an example for you. So I just have two questions for people. They're very simple answers, whoever wants to answer them. Who was higher education created for?
Students.
I want to say wealthy people.
I heard someone say wealthy people. Let's be a little bit more specific with that answer. What wealthy person?
White rich people?
But not people, white rich.
Men.
Yes, men is exactly right. White rich men. And what were they intending to do as a result of going to college?
The intention was to basically give them I guess one leg up, if you could say. Like they have that background and knowledge, like, oh, I know this now because I went to college.
Okay, that's a good starting point. It's one specific thing that was when higher education was created. I think that's more of the goal now. But when it was created, there was with the intention of doing one thing. Who knows what that is? So for those of you who do not know, what they were intending to do was go into clergy. So the idea was that they were getting these degrees to go into ministry, to be elders, pastors, whatever the case may be. So very much so Protestant, Christian, foundational type of thing. And that's what higher education was created for white men, some who were presumably wealthy, maybe not as, well off, in some cases, but the idea was that they were intending to go into ministry or be a part of the clergy of said church. And so I found this quote in The Company He Keeps, a history of white college fraternities. And a part of this, they were talking about recruitment and what they were looking for when they were recruiting members for fraternities, back then. So I'm just going to read this to you, and then we're going to see what some initial thoughts are. There is only one complete, unblushing male in America, a young, married, white, urban, northern, heterosexual, Protestant, college-educated father, fully employed, of good complexion, weight and height, and a recent record in sports. So what are some initial reactions when you hear that that is the one complete unblushing male in America? Any thoughts on that?
It's like extremely specific.
It's very specific, absolutely. It's like to the T. There's not, there really isn't much wiggle room with that, you know? Any other thoughts about that?
Not every person is gonna fit all of those things.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts? I think for me, it kind of ties to, you know, when I talked about the history, how we're going to get into some history, and history is often glamorized and romanticized, and we try to make it pretty, and it's not always pretty, and this is a part of that. That was what it was back then. Obviously, I think we have moved past that, even with our fraternities that are predominantly white. I think that in some cases it has moved past this, but then that's what it was, and that's not something that is encompassing of, you know, what makes up America and what made up America then, not only what makes up America now. So I think it's important for us to understand that, like, you know, when there could be members of your organization that were, you know, back then during this time, whereas this is what they were looking for when they came to recruitment for a fraternity at a collegiate institution. So just think about that. And then I think we're going to get into some history now. So again, white college fraternities. Phi Beta Kappa, 1776, the College of William and Mary in Virginia. And they function as a literary society. So what was important about that when I was doing my research was that they would hold like debates and things like that. But they were debating things about like slavery. And it really wasn't like, should we get rid of slavery? It was more like, let's find more ways to validate reasons to continue it. So that was type of things that they were debating back then. And that was in 1776 in Virginia, the College of William and Mary. So think about that when you think about the foundation of your own organizations and when they were founded. And we're going to get more into that as a couple slides later in this presentation. So the Masonic influence. So for those of you who don't know, like they're like Freemasons, they were in existence long before fraternities came to be. And so when we have the idea of the Mason influence, what we have to understand is that that's where the idea of a secret society came from. And so, you know, when they had like different knocks to get into the different houses, and there was a certain knock that you used. If you were a member of the organization, you knew what that knock was, and that granted you access into that. That was how they came up with like rituals, different ceremonies, different things for initiation. That's where, you know, I know for my organization, we have what is called a grip, and it's a secret handshake that only members of my organization knows. And so I think, so that is also where that comes from as well, because the Masons had a secret handshake that they did. So I think it's important to understand that a lot of the things that we do now in Greek life were not started specifically by fraternities. It was started back then by the Masons. I don't want to knock over my water, by the Masons and what they were doing at that time. So just keep that in mind when you think about the different rituals and traditions and ceremonies that you have as a part of your organization. I don't want to get into specifics, obviously, out of respect to your organizations and the idea of them being a secret society. There has to be some sort of like secrecy as a part of that. But definitely understand that that is where it is influenced from, and obviously has transitioned over into fraternity and sorority life today. The expansion process looked very different than today. So if any of you are unfamiliar with doing expansion for your organization, you know, it probably has a very, very strict guidelines you have to follow, rules you have to follow. I know that when I was president of Greek Council, I had the pleasure of being a part of expansion for Chi Upsilon Sigma, National Latin Sorority Incorporated, Sigma Beta Rho Fraternity Incorporated, and Delta Phi Epsilon. And again, like I said, working with those different organizations and all of that fun stuff, it looked very streamlined, very particular. They wanted certain things done. This expansion process, through my research, I found out was that when they wanted the expansion to happen, it would be an individual could be at another college, and they would get in contact with a member from the College of William and Mary, and they had the Constitution written on paper. And so what they would do is that they deemed that person as worthy of being welcomed into Phi Beta Kappa. They would give them the bottom. They would have the Constitution written. At that point in time, probably was only on one sheet of paper because. What constitutions back then, you know what I'm saying? And they would rip the piece of paper in half, and they would give the mother chapter, as is written in the book, the mother chapter would keep the top half, and then the next person would keep the bottom half. And so what would happen is that if they were recruiting people who were not living up to the values and ideas of this organization, they would be able to go, or however, and get the bottom half back, and that would then rescind that membership of that individual. So again, very, very interesting. Not really anything that is nothing like I would want expansion to happen today. I was involved in expansion for Rutgers University Camden about, was it now 2 years ago? And that would be horrible to think about that. And that just be something that we use for expansion. But then what it really boiled down to was that it was a little bit of elitism there. But what we have to understand that it was white men joining white men. So, you know, the very few, if any, of people of color that were at colleges at this time were not getting invited in to join the organization. And it was, what it boiled down to was that it was white men joining white men to, again, discuss things like slavery, racism, and all that kind of stuff, but never in a way to attempt to, you know, defy it or to go against it, but in ways to find ways to validate it. Are there any questions so far? Sorry, I don't want to go too fast either. So the chapters emerged. So like I said, 1776 was the foundation of it, but then chapters emerged from 1787 to 1830. But one thing about that was that it was poor communication. So that's how it started, with differing traditions and rituals. Remember how I talked about those rituals and traditions that came from the Masons' influence? That was getting messed up because of the poor communication. And so we have to understand that when you have an organization, we're so proud of the organizations we belong to, and we're so proud of the traditions and rituals that we have, or what we know to be traditions and rituals from what was given to us. And could you imagine going to a different chapter and being involved in a ceremony or being involved in whatever, and they're doing something completely different or something that goes against the foundation of your organization, and you don't, but you don't know why they're doing it, but it could be because of poor communication. And that's not something that I think happens in 2021 now. I think we have a good handle on that kind of stuff, where I can go to a chapter and know what's going to happen in regards to LSU and things like that. But that was what was going on then. Poor communication. So differing traditions and rituals began to happen, and it was not creating a plan for success and for sustainability. Then in 1831, it's called the Anti-Masonic Party. And this was a party that was introduced in the United States that wanted to get rid of anything that was the idea of a secret society. And so the Masons were a part of that, but then Phi Beta Kappa was a part of that, because 1831, you know, that they were a part of that. And so there was a man, the first name is William, I'm drawing a blank on the last name. First name was William, and he was about to publish a book that was going to reveal all the secrets from the Masons and what they did for their rituals, their traditions, and their secret handshake and all that kind of stuff. He was going to publish a book for that. And I know some of you are probably cringing right now in your seats to think that someone would expose your organization's secrets that way. You know what I'm saying? But that was what he was going to do. And then he went missing. So through research, it doesn't say that he was dead or he was found dead. He just went missing. And then in the same year, Phi Beta Kappa became an honor society. And so my understanding, and if I'm not mistaken, they are one of the most prestigious honor societies you can be a part of now in like, a collegiate atmosphere. But that was why, was because they published, I believe from what I remember seeing, they published their own stuff and what they were doing and things of that nature. And I know still in honor societies, there's some secrecy to it as well, but it's not held, in some cases, I don't think it's held in the same regard as those of us who belong to fraternities and sororities. But let's talk truth. So for any of my members on here, my friends on here who are a part of IFC organizations, I want you to think about the year your organization was founded, and let's talk about some truth and what time was that in our country in America? Is anyone here a part of an IFC organization?
Yes, I think a bunch of us are.
Okay. Yeah, so let's think about the year your organization was founded, and then let's talk about what some of that truth could be about the founder, about the foundation of your organization and the founders of your organization.
Yeah, there should be a couple organizations on here.
Cap Sig was formed in 1869.
Okay, so 1861. And so think about the timing of that in our country in America at that time. What could you believe to be true about that?
Well, I mean, if it was born in 1869, I think the American Civil War was around 1861 to like the 1880s.
Okay, that's a good start. Thank you for saying that. Any other organizations on here besides Kappa Sigma?
AXP was founded in 1895 by a couple Protestant ministers, actually.
Okay, and so 1895. So what could potentially be said about that and things, and what could be gauged from knowing 1895 when your organization was founded?
Tensions in the U.S. were definitely pretty high. It's things like Jim Crow laws and stuff like that in the South. It's from Connecticut though. It's at Trinity College, so I don't know too much about what's going on in the North, but yeah.
Oh, definitely, absolutely. And I think a lot of times when you think about history, and I had to learn this myself when I was an Africana Studies minor at Stockton, excuse me. We talk a lot about history and talk about racism in our country. We speak a lot about the South. And all those things are true. What they say about the South is absolutely true, but I think sometimes we forget that some of those things were happening up north as well. May have been happening a little bit differently, but I know for a fact that New Jersey has land that slaves were once on, like picking cotton, working the field, all of that kind of stuff. And New Jersey is not a state that's Southern. So I definitely hear what you're saying though, in terms of like at that point in time, maybe it wasn't well documented about what was going on in that part of the country at that time. Anyone else on the call, on a meeting? Sorry, this is not a phone. This is definitely Zoom. So the reason why I said let's talk truth, like I said before, the part about being real, we have to own history, you know. And I think a part of it is that when we think about these things, we have to understanding the timing of it, and still that could the history could be ugly, and where your organization has progressed, at that, to this time or the time where you came in as a part of your organization could be something that is so magical and so beautiful now, but maybe it didn't start that way as it relates to marginalized communities. So plain and simple, some of our organizations and in terms of like the IFC and some of those older, more traditional organizations of what they're classified as, fraternities, some of them could have been slave owners. Some of them could have absolutely had slaves that were working the field, that were engaging in that racist behavior, and things like that. And so I think that we need to understand that that is something that is a very real possibility, and documented in some of the research that we have about fraternity and sorority life here. And so I just want to make sure that we understand that, like when I say let's talk truth, it's because we have a saying in our fraternity, and it's really, really special to our chapter, that says, in order to know where you're going, you must know where you come from. And so that means ancestry, that means traditions, that means culture, but understanding what it meant then and what it means now. And those can be two very different things, and it's okay if it is. But understanding that sometimes we kind of ignore the history, we want to glamorize the history, and we can't do that. And we can't do that in order for us to move forward properly and become those awesome like DEI advocates you all want to be for your chapters and be for the Greek community as a whole. So that's what I mean when I say let's talk truth. So sororities. Let's just ask two simple questions. I'm sure we can get some conversation going about that. Why did they come into play?
To empower women.
Okay, that is absolutely true. Absolutely. Any other sorority women on the on here understand why sororities came into play? So yes, someone said why to empower women. Yes, it's very few documentations of women gaining membership, and it should say in fraternities. But even though they came into play to empower women, at the time that they came into play, who did they exclude?
Women of color.
Women of color, yes, thank you. If you're writing answers in the chat, I'm sorry, I can't see the chat when I'm sharing my screen. So I'm sorry, I can't see that. But yes, women of color. And so when we think about why sororities came into play, absolutely right, to empower women. I think there was some documentation of women joining, two that I saw specifically were Sigma Alpha Epsilon, so SAE, and then Tau Delta Phi. But the reason why sororities came into play, which they were known originally as women's fraternities, the term sorority was used in 1882 for the first time when for the foundation of Gamma Phi Beta, which was a sorority that was based out of New York. But they came into play because women were interested in joining these fraternities, right? But men were okay with them joining on an abridged version. So you can be a member of our fraternity, you can be a member of our organization, but you don't have the full rights and you don't have the full privileges that come with being a member, but we are going to give you a whole bunch of responsibilities to remain your partial membership. And so that is why sororities came into play, because why would I, as an individual, join something partially when I can just go ahead and make my own, and I can empower other women to do the same thing, and we can all come together and do our own work for community and things like that. But in the time that they were coming into play, they were still excluding women of color. So was it all totally inclusive? Probably not. And at that time, while it wasn't something that was well known or widely talked about or widely accepted, I would even throw in there trans women. If there were trans women at that time, they also weren't being accepted into sororities when they were women's fraternities. Sorry, when they were first started. So 1851, Alpha Delta Pi was the first. These were local organizations, so they're known as the first, but they were local. And then 1852, Phi Mu, but again, like I said, kept on a local level. So 1867, Pi Beta Phi was the first national women's fraternity. They became national because I'm drawing a blank on the location of the institution, but they started a second chapter and that made them a national women's fraternity. So that was why they're noted as the first national women's fraternity. But in some documentation of history, Alpha Delta Pi and Phi Mu are recognized as the first as well. So again, like I said, they came into play because they weren't getting full membership by the fraternities that were in existence at that time. And so they decided to make their own thing, still do community service, still have that nurturing piece, as we know a lot of women to be. But they also, they were going to separate schools for like women's seminaries and things of that nature. So there wasn't they really weren't going to the same schools as men. They were going to women's colleges as well. They weren't involved in like co-ed curricular institutions at that time. So just think about that as well when you think about history and all of that. And then we're going to move on. So again, like I said, we talked about who they were excluding, and what was women of color, who were the fraternities excluding, men of color, and people of color in general at that time. And so we have the establishment of historically Black Greek letter organizations. And so I think it's important that a lot of times we think, and I know I did until I did my own research, that all of the Divine Nine, when I was in high school, I thought they all were started at Howard University, because that's just all you ever heard, Howard University, Howard University. And through research, you find out that the first fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, was founded at Cornell University in New York in 1906. At a time where students at Cornell were leaving. They were leaving the institution, Black students, they were leaving the institution because they did not feel that Cornell was a place for them. And so that became the establishment of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And so you got to think about how big that was for Blackness, and to be able to honor that Blackness and own that Blackness and be in that, that camaraderie. And so that was really, really important then. And they were founded by 7 men. At Cornell University, and they have tons of chapters now. I know we have a chapter at Stockton, and doing such amazing work. But again, thinking about the time that it was started in 1906, when you think about the history of movements in our country and the representation of people, when you're thinking about people who may identify as LGBT or things like that, they could have been excluded from membership processes and things of that nature, as it relates to historically Black Greek letter organizations, or even moving forward to our historically Latinx-based organizations as well. So obviously you have Alpha Kappa Alpha, who was started in 1908 at Howard University. So they were started at Howard University, but again, it's important that not all of them were started at Howard. But again, Alpha Kappa Alpha came together to unify women. They really, really believed in the women empowerment piece. And so that's why they were started. By that time, I think the beta chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha was already at Howard, which was founded in 1907. So they might have had some help from Alpha Phi Alpha, but Alpha Kappa Alpha was established in 1908. Indiana University, Kappa Alpha Psi, 1911. And so it's important that when you know Kappa Alpha Psi, again, PWI institution, they started Kappa Alpha Psi as the way history is written is that it was an alternative to some clubs that were racially exclusive on that campus at that time. And so Black people just couldn't join whatever fraternity, couldn't join whatever club, whatever the case may be. So these Black men, 10 Black men, came together and created Kappa Alpha Psi, again, as a safe place, as a safe haven, as a safety net for the Black students at that institution at that time. Howard University, Omega Psi Phi, 1911. So I want to make sure that we understand they were founded in the same year, Kappa and Omega, by Howard University. Is someone writing on this? I don't know what's happening or why that's doing that. I apologize. But yeah, so they were founded in 1911 at Howard University at the time, and their motto was "Friendship is essential for the soul." Is there? Oh, okay. No problem, Mark. And then Howard University again, 1913, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. That is when they were established. And they were established right at the time when women's suffrage was a thing. And so the reason why I wanted to highlight when sororities came into play and how they were not encompassing of all women is because when you think about the women's suffrage march and things like that, they were going on at that time when Delta Sigma Theta was founded. When the Deltas were walking, they were walking for all women. They weren't walking just for Black women. They were walking for women who were Black, who were Asian, who were white, who were Latina. They were walking for all of them. And so that's important to understand that, you know, when they came in and started with the picking up the fight and carrying on the torch and things like that, they wanted to make sure that it was encompassing of all women. So that's really important to note about Delta Sigma Theta. Howard University, Phi Beta Sigma, 1914. So one thing, you know, when you do research about the Divine Nine, at that time at Howard, so 1914, they had a chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha, they had a chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi, and they had a chapter of Omega Psi Phi at Howard University. During that time period, those three organizations were known as like the elite. And they were like the elite of the elite. So it's like, you know, there was like Black and then there was like bougie Black. And so those men who were a part of Alpha, Kappa, and Omega were bougie Black. And so Phi Beta Sigma came into play because they wanted to be the people's frat. And they wanted to be the organization that, not that they're just going to accept anybody, but we don't want people to feel unwelcomed or not feel like they can be included in our fraternity. And so that is why they were started in 1914, which was no like disrespect, you know, to the Alphas or the Kappas or Omegas and things of that nature, but they have found a different need that they could fulfill for the student body of Howard University at that time. Which then led to the creation of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated in 1920 by 5 women. They did have help from a founder of Phi Beta Sigma establish Zeta Phi Beta. In 1920, you know, that's when race wars were high, lynchings were high, things of that nature. And so the Zetas were on the front line, making sure that they're fighting against those injustices and fighting against all of that. Butler University, another PWI, Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated in 1922. What's so special about this is because Sigma Gamma Rho was founded by 7 women. They were actually graduates of Butler University. They were not undergrads, as in comparison to most organizations that you think about the founding of. So they were not undergrad members, they were grad students, and they were 7 teachers. And they were really working towards fixing things within the community. And so when you say within the community, they were referring to the Black community and how education could be a powerful tool in that. So that is how Sigma Gamma Rho came to be. And then Morgan State University, Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated in 1963. And so this was unique and was special because the Iotas were founded by more non-traditional students, as we would classify them in higher education. So adult learners or people who are going back to school. And then they had a lot of their founders were also involved locally in activism and things of that nature. And a lot of them were veterans. So that's also important to understand that again gave representation, gave a voice to people who sometimes go voiceless, who sometimes go unseen, unheard. And that was a part of the creation of Iota Phi Theta. Please understand that I'm not the expert in history of Greek life. I'm not the expert in I don't belong to any of these organizations. So I would encourage you to speak to members of these organizations if you want more in-depth, detailed history and things of that nature. But through the research that I was able to do, this is what I was found that would be beneficial for this presentation. Okay, I'm trying to go to the next slide. It's not moving. Okay, so NALFO, the National Association for Latino Fraternal Organizations and the National Multicultural Greek Council. So who was the first? And the reason why we talk about that is because there's two different documentations of history. And I know when I came in to Lambda Sigma Upsilon, when we were learning the history of Latino-based organizations, I was informed that Lambda Theta Phi was the first Latin fraternity to exist. And it would make sense because they were founded in 1975. We were founded in 1979, so that's before us. So that would make them the first because we're known as the second. And then I got into some social circles, some group chats. You know, we Greek, we love group me's. And I got had some SANs which are people who pledged the same semester and year as me, that were part of Phi Iota Alpha. And, we throw shade and things like that. And so in the little group chats, they were talking, Phi Iota Alpha saying they're the first, Lambda Theta Phi saying they're the first. And so it's important to understand that, so I'm going to get this correct, the history of Phi Iota Alpha can be traced back to 1868 at a college in Troy, New York, with 5 Latin men. Unfortunately, there isn't like that much history documented at that time, because who knew how to do that during that time period? And so things were lost in translation, things were lost over time. And so when 1975 comes around and Lambda Theta Phi and Lambda Theta Alpha are establishing themselves as the first Latin fraternity and the first Latin sorority, that is how history has been written, because for a while we did not know anything about, Phi Iota Alpha in 1868. For me, 2 things can be true at one time. And so I think that from the time period that these things were documented, I think that they're both true. But more traditionally, we were informed, or we have been told, that Lambda Theta Phi and Lambda Theta Alpha are the first Latin fraternity and Latin sorority, which I know we both have chapters at Stockton University. So the three phases of the movement for Latino fraternal organizations are Principio, Fuezo, and fragmentation. That is what that word means. I do not want to mispronounce it. And so principle, foundation, what foundation of it? And so that's when you think about Lambda Theta Phi, Lambda Theta Alpha, you think about Phi Iota Alpha, you think about Lambda Sigma Epsilon. These are organizations that were a part of like the foundation of the Latino fraternal movement. And then comes the force. So that's what Fuezo means, the force behind it. And the force behind it is they created new energy, created new ideas, new initiatives, new things. And so that was with the creation of Chi Upsilon Sigma, National Latin Sorority Incorporated, and Lambda Upsilon Lambda. And so the reason why we highlight Lambda Upsilon Lambda is because Lambda Upsilon Lambda was founded at Cornell University. So the same college that Alpha Phi Alpha was founded at, but that was big for Latino Greek culture, because similar to Alpha Phi Alpha being the first Black Greek letter organization, in general, but founded there at a PWI, a elite Ivy League PWI institution. That was the same thing for LUL. So Lambda Upsilon Lambda is the first Latino-based organization that was founded at an Ivy League institution. And then kind of wrapping up some of the force behind that, and during this time period, Latino fraternities and sororities were very popular in Jersey, New York, some in Pennsylvania, very, very popular, not far out west and things of that nature. And so that's when Sigma Lambda Beta, sorry, I got to draw a blank on the name real quick. Sigma Lambda Beta Fraternity Incorporated came into play in the Midwest. And then Kappa Delta Chi was founded out in California. And they're both Latin-based organizations. And so that was why the force behind the movement, that's why it's called that, because they started opening up avenues and things like that. And then the fragmentation of the movement had some successes and had some failures. And why we say that is because more Latino students were getting involved and wanting to come to college campuses. When they were coming to college campuses, they were looking for Greek organizations to join. Expansion may not have been happening as fast as possible for some of the orgs that were already in place. So thinking about LTA, LT5, LSU, things of that nature, they were not moving as fast. And so during this period of time in the movement of Latino fraternal organizations, there were 2 fraternities created and then 17 sororities. And you think about that, like 17 sororities is a lot of sororities. But these women were coming to campuses, not finding what they were looking for or not finding what they thought was going to be there. And so they were creating their own. To this day, I don't know how many of them are like still active and still like, do membership and have conventions and things of that nature. But during that time period, which was like late 1980s, I think so, even almost to the early 2000s, was that time period, and that 17 Latin-based sororities were founded at that time. So a lot of them you won't hear about, you won't know about. Some of them are based out of New York, so they have chapters up there and they're flourishing, but may not be as like global or as nationwide. When you think about Sigma Lambda Beta, going back to them real quick, they are the only organization in our council that is known as an international organization. They do not have any chapters internationally. Puerto Rico, they do have a chapter in Puerto Rico, but Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. But they have that in their identity because of the makeup of their founders who came from Mexico, who came from Cuba, who came from El Salvador. And so that is why they have that they are an international fraternity. The creation of NALFO was created in 1988, and that was created simply because we needed a force behind all of these Latino fraternal organizations that were coming together. We needed a force behind it, and we needed, something similar to the NPHC, something similar to the Pan-Hellenic Council, something similar to the Interfraternal Council. We needed something similar for that as well, and so that was the creation of NALFO. And then moving forward, Mu Sigma Epsilon Sorority Incorporated is the first multicultural Greek-lettered organization in our nation. And the reason why that's important to understand is because Mu Sigma Epsilon Sorority Incorporated was founded by 5 Latina women. And so because they are connected with Lambda Sigma Epsilon, Latino Fraternity Incorporated, people just assume that because we're a Latino fraternity, that makes them a Latin sorority or a Latina sorority, and that absolutely is not the case. They were a multicultural sorority since its inception, so it wasn't something that was developed over time. And that's important to understand that, sororities like Omega Phi Chi and then Lambda Tau Omega, things of that nature were founded after Mu Sigma Epsilon. And then I know Phi Sigma Phi was also the first multicultural fraternity. But again, MSU was the first multicultural Greek letter organization in the nation. And then the National Multicultural Greek Council was founded in 1988. So again, the same year as NALFO. Again, to have the council, to have that support, to have that leadership in place, to have that professional development, all of that fun stuff. So that's a little bit of history about the NALFO and Multicultural Greek Council. What we also want to highlight is that, again, through this kind of thing, and I can speak for my own organization and saying that, yes, now I am proud. I was very happy that I was able to pledge and be openly gay and be able to tell people that. I don't know if that was happening in 1979 when my organization was founded. And so we have to think about that in the creation of these organizations. While we hold them so near and dear to our hearts, what does history tell us? And at that time, history tells us that, HIV and AIDS was rampant, but being a part of the LGBTQ community was something that was so taboo that people didn't talk about it. They treated it very similar to teenage pregnancy. You kind of stayed hidden, you stayed in the closet, and it wasn't something that you were out and open about. And so understanding that now our organization has then progressed since then, and we have plenty of brothers who are a part of the community, plenty of sisters of our different sororities who are a part of the community. But at that time in history, that was not something that was widely accepted, and we have to acknowledge that and own it. Yeah, so I just like to throw in a little bit of theory here, and this is just 4 parts to it, something that's very, very quick. But the identity development theory is something that I think is important when you talk about the creation and development of Greek organizations, because there's so much that plays into you developing your identity as a student. And some of this plays a role in high school, even before you get to college. But then when you're in college, that's when some of that nurturing happens, and you are able to kind of understand and go through like the 4 parts here, which is like diffusion, foreclosure, moratorium, and achievement. And so diffusion is when you haven't set place on an identity. You're it's like an exploration phase. You don't really know what it is and things like that. And sometimes, for some of us, not me specifically, but some people who may be people of color could have perhaps grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. And so their culture may have been something that has been suppressed for them their entire life until they get into a collegiate atmosphere and see people who look like them and identify with them, who are so proud of their culture and who are so embedded in their culture. And so that kind of helps them explore that and understand. Moving forward to foreclosure and then a moratorium. So you think about a moratorium, you think about what? Stop, right? You think about stop. We all know what moratorium is in terms of Greek organizations. I think we've all seen a couple happen in our time as being members of our organizations. So stop. So you stop exploring. You don't stop developing necessarily, but in terms of you trying to understand what makes up your identity, you kind of stay put in a little bit of like almost discomfort to kind of see what it is and what makes it up and things of that nature. And then you move forward to identity achievement is when you have understood what makes up your identity, how you identify, and then like how you're going to utilize that to like, put yourself and put your best foot forward. So just think about that when you think about recruitment and things like that. Where are your potential new members at in their identity development theory? Or in their identity development. Sorry, I don't like to just make people theories. That's kind of weird. We shouldn't do that to people. But the theories are in place for a reason because research has been done and things like that. But think about potential new members. Where are they at in their identity development? What exactly, how are you going to add to their identity development when it comes to this? Whether you're a culturally based organization or a traditional organization. Real quick tip about that. I know when I was an undergrad, I used to say mainstream. Like mainstream were the more traditional organizations, and I belonged to a minority serving organization. Didn't even know culturally based was like the proper term to use. And I went to a conference and someone asked us a question and somebody had said, oh, well, it was a member of a culturally based org, but they said mainstream so-and-so. And the presenter was a Zeta, and she had said, we have to get out of saying that they're mainstream organizations because mainstream just means national. So majority of us are national organizations. We have chapters across the United States. So that makes us all a mainstream organization. We just have different influences and different goals and things like that with what we highlight. And so that's why we say culturally based organizations and then more traditional organizations that encompass some of the IFC and Pan-Hellenic sororities. So moving forward from that. So I know that Joe has sent out an article to you all, and I just kind of want to take a couple moments to discuss that and just kind of hear your thoughts on the article that Joe has sent us about it. Because I know starting with the title, his fraternities and sororities are starting to like, take ownership of their racist past. Like starting with the title alone, I was like, wow. So what were some of your thoughts about the article that you read? If you read it, because I'm not sure who read it and who didn't. Oh, thank you, Joe. Yes, Joe just put the article in the group chat.
So Ellis, this is Joe. I'll speak to it for a moment. I think it's really important, and you said it earlier. It's not about, if I'm a member of an organization that, might have been started by members that were, slave owners after the Civil War, or, our organization had a problem with certain things, whether it be racism or something like that over the course of our history. I don't think that necessary, by us talking about it and saying that it's important that we acknowledge these things, it's not about being ashamed of our organization or being embarrassed of our organization, or, that we should somehow feel bad about that because we joined an organization like that. The reality is we need to acknowledge these things just as we need to acknowledge that, our nation in itself has a very racist past.
Mm-hmm.
That because we don't know where we're going until we know where we've been, as you said. It's important to acknowledge these things so that we know what work we still need to do, to be more inclusive organizations, to really live up to the values and the mission of our organizations. And our founders may have thought they were living up to the mission and the values of the organization at the time, right? Because these things kind of transfer, kind of transform over time, the meaning. And I'm a proud member of Phi Mu Delta fraternity, and you actually advised our chapter up at New Hampshire. But we, University of Vermont, which is where our organization was founded, has a history on their campus where for a very long time the fraternity and sorority community held minstrel shows. And I know for a fact my chapter, which is our first chapter, participated in those, right? And that's actually become an important part of history for that chapter when the new members are going through the new member program. because I think sometimes it's really easy to think your organization is the best and can do no wrong. And,
Okay.
and I think it's important to acknowledge that, like, man, we really messed up in the past and we can't act like this was hundreds of years ago. This stuff still happened 30, 40 years ago. So if our dad was in the chapter, our dad might have, so it's not like it was that long ago. And I think it's important that we acknowledge this history and, what can we learn from it? Because we like to think that things like that, still don't go on today, right? But racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, these things kind of show themselves in very different ways in different time periods. So it's really easy for us to say, like, we don't have any racism or sexism or anything in our organization anymore, right? It's really easy to say that, but I think unless we are, having these conversations, really understanding our history and talking about it, can we really acknowledge and really move forward in a way that's more helpful, So I think I think this article really gets to that with everything that's been going on the past couple of years. So hopefully for those who did read the article, it was a good precursor to this conversation we had today.
Thank you, Joe. Definitely. I know for me, I mean, Joe and I are friends on Facebook and, have developed a great friendship since, I graduated from Stockton. I was very, very vocal on Facebook when, things are going on and, Black and brown people are being murdered by the hands of police officers. And it's just like so much civil unrest in our country. And I'm looking through social media and looking for my IFC brothers and my Pan-Hellenic sisters, like, what's going on? Like, where are you? Like, where are your voices at? Where's the outcry? Where's the solidarity? And I was vocal about that through my social media platforms, because I think it's important to understand that, we're not here just for your like pleasure and your enjoyment when you want to see a step, stroll, or salute. Or, when you want to see that kind of stuff, like we have history, we have things that are still happening to us, and we need your allyship in order for us to progress forward, in order for things that matter to us and things that pertain to us and things that happen to us to be progressed forward. So I think that what you said is absolutely right. I know I can give an example quickly about my own chapter. I'm very proud of my chapter and the things that we have done. And there was something that happened before I became a member that I was made aware of. And once I've been made aware of this, I made a personal commitment to myself to never let it happen again. And so there was a student at Stockton, I don't remember the name, but I wouldn't say it anyway out of respect to the student, who was in a wheelchair. And we was in a wheelchair. And if you know anything about intake for culturally based organizations, you have to learn how to stand in a certain way to recite information. And like sometimes it requires you to be someone that's able to step or someone that's able to dance or whatever the case may be. And so obviously with him being in a wheelchair, he was not able to do those things. And so as an organization, I don't even know if he ever got sent up or sent out for regionals or nationals to take a look at to see how could we even include him through our new member education process. And so he never got a chance to become a brother of our organization. And so we have to think about that now. And this was before I became a brother. So I became a brother in 2012. That was before that. And so 9 years later, I still have that commitment to myself to make sure that never happens again. And I'll tell you how it comes full circle. Spring 2019, I got a call from one of my brothers, Omar Chambers, who is a brother from St. Peter's University. And he called me. At the time, he was our regional intake officer. And he said, I need you to do Rutgers Camden for expansion. And you have everyone, I'm sure on this call, I'm sure Joe can attest to this. Everyone has those people that when they call you, you just answer, and it's usually just a yes without question. And Omar was one of those people for me. And so we start the process of getting things in, making sure we have admin picked out, people who are going to do their education, making sure we have their big brothers picked out, all of that kind of stuff. And then I found out that one of them actually had a physical disability. And so in my brain instantly clicked, this is my chance now to make sure that mistake that happened before I became a brother doesn't happen while I'm a brother. And so he went through the process. was able to participate with his line brother. Some adjustments were made and things of that nature because he was number 2 of 5. But there were things that we typically do in our organization that we were not able to do at a probate out of respect to him because we didn't want to single him out. We didn't want to make him feel like he was not a brother of our organization. And so I was so proud of myself in that moment to have saw all 5 of them through the finish line, but definitely him because of the challenge that came along with him having a physical disability. So again, like I said, you know, we have to own the fact that the history is not always the best in our organizations. And I'm not saying it's the worst, but it's not always the best. And we've made mistakes in the past. And so once we learn of those mistakes, once we become aware of those mistakes, how are we adjusting our methods? How are we starting new initiatives? How are we starting new committees to make sure that those mistakes are not happening again? Anyone else about the article? Well, I hope you all do take time to talk about that at maybe a group council meeting, or if you have like a DEI representative meeting and things of that nature, a committee meeting, I'm sorry, just to have that conversation about it, because there's some really, really good stuff in that article. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening here. Yes, so takeaways. Again, history is not always pretty. And I want to make sure that we understand that, you know, when you think about history in the history books, when you're going through K through 12 education, and even sometimes in a collegiate classroom, we're not here to butter it up, you know? I always tell people all the time, if you want something sugar-coated, go to the candy factory. This is not the time for that. We have to be able to talk about history, no matter how ugly it is, and understand that that may not be where we are now, but that is definitely where we came from, and we don't want to go back to that place. So history is not always pretty. Understanding your roots will make way for a better tomorrow. So by that, I mean, again, in order to know where you're going, you must know where you come from. And so understanding your roots, take time to understand the history of your personal family. Take time to understand the history of your fraternal family and your fraternity, sorority that you're a part of. Take time to understand the history of other organizations on your councils at the campus, because that's also going to be important for you as well. I say this, and I say this all the time. Privilege, it is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And so whatever privileged identity you hold, and everyone on this call holds a privileged identity because you're all getting a college education or already have a college education. And so that puts you at some sort of like level up in society. So everyone holds a privilege on this call. It is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And it is your responsibility to do something with that privilege for those who are marginalized and oppressed. It is your responsibility to make sure that you're just not going to sit back and benefit from the privilege without doing things to help out those who do not have the same access to resources that you do, due to identities that they didn't ask for, they were just given upon birth. Understand your weight, understand the weight your Greek letters carry and the influence you have because of them. I cannot tell you how many times people just do not take the time to teach new members to, you know, to have that educational moment that your letters carry so much weight. And I mean that in like, sometimes they could be heavy, and just heavy in terms of, I had these letters across my chest and now there's a stamp on me. And sometimes the stamp is not always, oh, they did 10,000 hours of community service and raised $25,000 for their philanthropy. Sometimes it's, oh, there was a fraternity or sorority that had a party off campus and somebody got drunk and sadly passed away. And now that's the stigma of all fraternity and sorority life here at the institution. So understand the weight that your Greek letters carry, but also understand the influence that you have because of them. So because you have Greek letters, you have influence, you have power, and you have the power and potential to influence others. I mean, that was one thing that I learned. You know, I've been fortunate enough to be new member educator 4 times since in the 9 years that I've been a member. And I'm so proud of the people that I brought into my organization, because I understood the influence I had over them at that time of making sure that they became productive new members of our organization. So again, recognize the influence you have, be it on campus, be it in a committee, be it in a Greek council at all, be it in your respective councils, so NPAC or UCGC, all of that kind of stuff. Understand the influence you have and then utilize it to progress forward. So you never want to retract. You always want to be proactive as possible, which is why I think the creation of this committee is absolutely amazing. So that way you can do some of this education up front and not, hopefully, not worry about things happening, and then you have to be reactive and then do things retroactively. So understand the weight your letters carry, but then also understand the influence you have because of them. And I know this is difficult sometimes, especially for those of us who belong to culturally based organizations, but don't be afraid to start something new. Go against the grain. Please, please, please understand that yes, organizations have traditions. Yes, we have rituals. Yes, there's a culture aspect to every organization, in my opinion. And also, it is nothing wrong with creating a new norm. So we're in 2021. If something happened in your organization that could have been offensive, that could have been something that was not encompassing, that was not inclusive, and let's say it happened in 1989, why is that same thing happening in 2001? I would never understand. So don't be afraid to start something new. Don't be afraid to go against the grain. And by that, I also mean when it comes to holding your brothers and your sisters accountable, don't be afraid to do so. That was one of the things I'm most known for in my organization, in my chapter, and in my organization, regionally and nationally. I go off on people when things just don't make no sense, and when people choose to remain ignorant. We cannot do that. So I call people out. It's one of those things that I have that camaraderie with most brothers in my organization, that I can have that type of conversation with them and they won't get offended. They will understand what I'm saying and why I'm saying it. But if you have that relationship with that brother or that sister, or if you're in that meeting for business, they should understand that at that time during business, we have to talk about some difficult topics. It shouldn't impact our personal relationship outside of this. So again, don't be afraid to start something new or go against the grain. This is the questions, comments, or insights, but I did want to point out that I do have sources as well, and I'll send this presentation to Joe in case anyone wants it for like their chapter or something like that. But any questions or comments? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Any questions, comments, or insights from anyone on the Zoom meeting?
Well, this is Joe again. I'll just say, there's definitely chapters that are probably on right now that are doing some really great things in their chapters. Shout out to organizations like ZTA. I know that they had a huge effort this year to really Sigma Delta Tau, organizations that are really putting a huge effort to focus a lot on DEI issues and do some programming and education in their chapter meetings. I know for a fact that the vast majority of your headquarters, your national organizations, are doing some really great things. Make sure you are taking advantage of those. If there's doing programs at national convention or doing stuff online, to make sure your members are participating in those, and that whatever resources you can get from them, that you are having those discussions within your chapter. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of your organizations will basically provide you program outlines so that you guys can do, have conversations within your chapters, and not have to rely on, bringing someone in like Ellis to do a program. You could start the conversation on your own. So make sure you utilize resources you have in front of you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. It was a pleasure to come do this. Absolutely. Because, Joe had mentioned I was very involved in the Greek community when I was at Stockton, and still involved with my chapter, just doing alumni advisor work and things of that nature. But I think it's important for you all to understand that everything doesn't have to be this broad conversation or like this broad scale program. It can be something, if they give you an outline, hey, do your own research. Although I knew some of that stuff that I talked about, I had to do some additional research to make sure I was giving accurate information during this presentation. So do your own research and be able to have that conversation. It's definitely possible. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you, Joe.